My name is Michael Goldberg, and I'm the executive director of our Veale Institute for Entrepreneurship at Case Western Reserve. And I also am an associate professor at the Weatherhead School of Management. And we are thrilled to have an old friend join us today as part of our Case Western Reserve Entrepreneurship Alumni Speaker Series. You know, when we have alums, we throw in the alumni. So Felipe, for those of us on campus, we always actually talk about our poster children of entrepreneurs. So Felipe, for a long time, was our student poster child, and now he's our alumni poster child. So we had to, switch posters. So, but it's great to reconnect. I got to know Felipe when he was a student on campus, and always appreciated what his energy, his passion, his willingness to mentor and engage with other student entrepreneurs on campus and alums. And whenever we needed to roll him out to talk about the cool things he was working on, he was always in between sort of swim practice and class and working on his startup. He was always willing. So Felipe, thank you for taking the time to come back to Case today and join us.
It's always a pleasure. I wish I could be there in person. I miss it a little bit.
Great. These sessions are moderated, that we do are moderated by students, and we're thrilled to have Marianne, who is one of our engineering undergraduate students, as today's moderator. I'll tell a quick story about Marianne. We launched a program this summer called the Remote Entrepreneurship Project Program. And Marianne, what engineer are you? What kind of engineer are you?
Chemical engineering.
Chemical engineer, Chemi. And what we were trying to do was place students like Marianne that were, because of the crisis, sort of looking for internships at the very last minute, sort of with internships that might sort of match their background. And by accident, I sent Marianne's CV to some friends of mine who run a media company called Your Teen Media. And then I sort of had realized it because they had said they were looking for more of a marketing intern. I sent Marianne's resume. She's Chemi. And I call Marianne. I'm like, are you okay if I shared your resume? And I was like, I bet you're going to get picked by these guys. And so we sent a few students. Of course, they selected Marianne, and it sounds like she had a great summer. So sometimes in the world of entrepreneurship placements, just, the being entrepreneurial and the approach like Marianne was this summer was appreciated. So Marianne, thank you for your flexibility, and thanks for moderating today. So I'm going to turn it over to Marianne. If you have questions for Felipe and you're on Zoom, just let Marianne know via the chat that you'd like to ask a question. We'd like to make these things as interactive as possible. If you're on LinkedIn Live, just put it in the comment that you want to ask Felipe a question, and we will be monitoring. So with that, over to you, Marianne.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be moderating today. So Felipe, why and how did you start doing plasma research?
Yeah, it was actually a bit of an interesting story. So I always say that the original idea behind FGC plasma actually was at some point a high school science fair. And that really came about because my grades in high school, were not that good. So I knew I had to do something fairly impressive if I was going to get into a good school. So starting around my junior year, I came up with an idea of doing a really cool science fair. I had sort of always been interested in aerospace stuff and electrical engineering stuff. There was this idea out there that people were exploring in papers of using, plasma or electrical discharges to improve combustion. But, very little practical stuff was getting done with it. So I essentially did a science fair where I messed around in my garage, some stuff that was probably too dangerous to do in a residential setting. Somehow I ended up getting some good awards for that, and then a scholarship to Case. And while I was at Case, sometime around my junior year, my sophomore year, actually, through talking to Bob, I was sort of convinced to not look at this as research, but to look at it as a startup, right? So that way I could always keep one eye sort of on the science and one eye on sort of the commercialization aspect of this. So that's really when I started being an entrepreneurial researcher, right? I was still doing research, right? It was still hard science, but everything had a commercial or an applications focus, and that's really driven everything that we've done today, right? Doing research in furtherance, not just of generating more knowledge, but of hitting a specific research objective, right? Which we tune by talking to different people in industry and figuring out exactly what it is that we're supposed to build, so that eventually we hopefully have a technology that we can hand off to the market.
Absolutely. Which resources did you use on campus, and kind of how did you use them?
Yeah, so I was definitely a regular at ThinkBox, actually, from the days of the old ThinkBox right in the basement of Glennon. That's where we sort of built the first prototype with funding from the student project fund at ThinkBox. That was like $200 of funding. Thinking back, I was kind of like, why couldn't I come up with $200 from somewhere else to build the first prototype? But as a student, $200 was a lot of money. I remember seeing like my bank account and wondering if I could afford to go to Mitchell's right on a given week. So with that $200, we built the first prototype at ThinkBox. Really, obviously not charging any of our labor, which is something that's very different from how we run as a company now. And there's also some faculty that helped us a lot in basically helping us set up our experiment in their labs and running some proof of concept experiments. I got a lot of help also from the Great Lakes Energy Institute, from GLEI, in sort of coaching us through the energy side, especially through a clean energy business plan competition that Department of Energy runs. And I think another critical resource was the IP Venture Clinic. So sort of that combination of LaunchNet, back then it was called Blackstone Launchpad, and an IP Venture Clinic helped not only define the business concept, but also make sure that all of the legal structures around our intellectual property, our FGC Plasma Solutions as an entity, make sure that all of that was set up when really I was a sophomore and a junior and had no idea about all sorts of thorny legal issues facing startups. And thankfully, we had that good coaching and free legal help from the beginning, because if not, a lot of those problems can come back and be serious hindrances to startups many years down the line. So I think that really set us up well for success, or at least the success we've gotten so far.
Now, obviously, those resources that you talked about were super important in helping prepare you, but how else did CASE prepare you to be a full-time entrepreneur?
Oh, sorry, I may have misunderstood your question a little bit. I think one of the things CASE helped with, which I think is underrated, is it helped me be okay with uncertainty, right? In entrepreneurship, right, the answers are not in the back of the book, right? There's no book, and I think that's one thing that I've seen a lot of people struggle with, right? That there's an ill-defined problem that you might not know the answer to, or the problem might not have an answer. And I think so that exists in a lot of areas in science, but it's also something CASE and my engineering education helped prepare me for, right? With this idea of, maybe there isn't an answer to the problem that I'm looking for, maybe it's not possible, but at least I know the approach to take to do it. And that sort of engineering approach towards solving a problem is really the same approach that I tried to bring together with my team to the business side.
Absolutely. Now, what were the most crucial steps in starting your business, and what was the most helpful in the first few years?
So I think actually one of the most helpful things in the first few years was the access to space at ThinkBox was fantastic. I'm not sure who I convinced to let me have an office there, but that was probably one of the nicest offices I think the nicest office I've ever had. So the access to space where you can sort of tinker and develop your ideas from or in the lab or building prototypes, I think that's absolutely critical. I think that's a really good skill for a lot of engineers to have. The fact that I could just walk into ThinkBox any day and then come out with a prototype that we could test, that was huge. And it's actually something that I've missed at other labs and facilities we've worked with. Now, in terms of other really critical resources, definitely the IPVC, right? So the ability to have good legal help and protection over intellectual property from the very beginning really were the key to making us attractive to investors, to funding agencies, to potential partners, because without some protection over your idea, it's especially as a student startup, you really have nothing, because you need some sort of solid barrier to entry to prevent people from doing what you're trying to do. So typically those are, typically you can't raise money without a patent, and typically it takes a lot of money to get a patent. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg thing, and I think that's a part of the equation that between the School of Law and Case they really helped solve for.
Throughout running your business, both in the first initial years when you were at Case and once you got out of Case especially, what were the biggest lessons that you've learned?
And I think that applied both to my academic career and my entrepreneurship career. I think one of them is definitely being okay with uncertainty, right? I think the other one is you're not getting too down when you hear no, because if you're trying to do something new, something that goes against the current, you're going to hear no so many times, and you really need to be confident in why you think your answer is a yes, right? So to me, that meant not like blind faith, but knowing that what we were doing was based on solid physical principles, that we weren't trying to break any laws of physics. Being confident in the science that we were doing, and that helped me, I guess, take it, if you will, when people would flat out tell you, this isn't going to work, or that's thinking too much beyond the possible, right? In a negative sense, not in the sense of our school's slogan. And I think the other issue that I really learned was that it's okay, and you should ask for help and input and advice from a variety of mentors, sources, etc. And actually, probably one of the most important things is just how hard you need to work on this. So that's something that I like to think that my background as a student athlete tied into as well, right? If you're trying to do something no one has done before, it's going to take an enormous amount of effort that you're probably not prepared for when you're starting this. So you just have to be along for the ride and keep working hard.
Those are some really great points. How has your business grown and evolved throughout the years from when you started it in a basement lab to where it is now with people on staff and you're, doing some of your research at MIT?
Yeah, it's been a crazy transformation that has really only happened thanks to my team and thanks to people who've believed in us and funded us, right? So that's everything from Department of Energy, Department of Defense, NASA, to some case competitions, which were really crucial in getting us early funding, right? So a few years ago, we were working out of the lab in a basement in Glennon. Then we did some experiments with NASA. Then we were based at a national laboratory that's a Department of Energy facility. Now we have experiments with various DoD labs, with Argonne, with MIT, with Notre Dame. There's 9 people on my team. We've raised almost $5 million. So it's one of those things that it's hard to believe. What has, in a sense, how lucky we've gotten, right, and where hard work has taken us. But it's also something that every day, I wake up and go to bed worried about the future, right? So there's highs and lows to entrepreneurship for sure.
Michael, you said you had a question?
Sure. Just to follow up, and it is amazing thinking about when we knew you and you were kind of walking the halls of Case and kind of bootstrapping and finding business plan competition funding to now growing a team. Maybe I think it'd be interesting for kind of the folks watching to kind of understand that kind of decision making from your perspective in terms of going after some of the grant funding that you've gone after or opportunities to sort of win funding in competitions versus the decision to take on equity investors and give up ownership of your company. And maybe you can sort of explain where you are in that journey and that decision making process between grant funding and competition funding versus equity funding?
Yeah, think of that. I think it's a great question, right? So, we're in a sense not a typical startup, right? Since we're in the hard tech space, right? There's still, I think the real differentiator there is that there's still a good amount of technical risk in our idea, right? So, for example, equity financing or most venture capital works well when you have business model risk, right, but not as much technical risk. So, for example, let's take Uber. Can you build when they were starting Uber, the idea of could you build an app that connects, riders with drivers, right? On the technical side, that's pretty straightforward, right? That's probably solvable. The risk there was the business model that are people going to get in strangers' cars, and are people going to want to drive, for total strangers connected by an app? That's a big business model risk, and sort of the way you prove that out is by taking capital and getting to some sort of minimal viable product, right, and proving out the business model. That, I think, works for a lot of types of entrepreneurship. But for example, what we're doing, or with other hard tech technologies, one of my mentors told me, for example, no one wants to fly across the Pacific on your minimum viable product, right? So some of the traditional ideas around entrepreneurship don't quite translate. So when you still have technical risk, that's something that most venture capitalists, for example, have a hard time accepting, right? And when you're in the more quote unquote sciencey stage, I think a lot of that work you have to buttress with significant funding from non-dilutive sources, right? So from business plan competitions or from the government. And the government has gotten very good at funding innovation, and I think it's a really crucial part of the ecosystem. And same goes for business plan competitions, right? So we basically led in from business plan competitions with some small equity financing, right? So we were part of a business incubator in Cleveland called Launch House, so that wasn't an equity financing. But basically, with some exceptions, we went through larger and larger prize competitions, right? Both from the government and business plan competitions, up through larger grant and contracting opportunities, until we were able to take equity financing. And now we have a mix of both, right? So we just finished our seed round, but before we took the first, real dollar of private investment, excluding a few angels, we had to raise about $4 million of money from the government, right? So that translates to around 9 federally funded projects that we ran or are in the course of before we were able to prove out the technology to a point where we, were an acceptable risk to an investor. So it's not as much that we chose to, instead of giving up equity, raise finance our growth and development from non-dilutive sources. It was really that we didn't have that much of an option. The technical risks and the development plan that we wanted to fund, I think, was just not acceptable for a lot of investors, and it took a lot of additional science, right, to get to a point where we demonstrated the technology to a point where it was acceptable for investment by more traditional startup funding sources. Now the way we operate is sort of a mix, right? So we sort of use federal and private funding, in concert to leverage each other. So we fund the higher risk things with, or things that are supporting a specific agency's mission with government dollars, and then we fund, things that you can't necessarily fund with government money with private money. So basically now we leverage private money with government investment, and then we leverage government investment with private capital. So I think that's a good model for sort of the growth of a technology that's spinning out of a university. And I think the thing to keep in mind here is that there's not just a one-size-fits-all model for how you should grow or finance a startup.
Great, thanks, Felipe.
Sure. No, it's a good question. I wish I would have had the choice to take venture money earlier. But.
The next question will be coming from Franco.
Hello.
Hey, Franco.
So, my question is actually sort of precedes Michael's in the sense that I'm more interested. I'd like to know. So you were doing research, right, in your high school, dug up something in your backyard, and won a couple science fairs and got into case, and you started doing hard science research. So mainly my question is, because the way I see ideas, they're this constant process of mutation where you're not ever really sure, you know, when to go through with it or not. And so I'd like to know what inspired you to start to turn your hard science part into having a business perspective from it and into actually doing a company out of that.
Yeah, Franco, I think that's a great way of framing it. There's at least in my experience, there are very few eureka moments where you know one day you don't have anything and the next day you're naked in the bathtub and you do, like Archimedes. Yeah, most of it is more of a slower process, right? So we started with an interesting idea, explored it a little bit more in the lab. The idea is that, you know, every day you're the next day you're not necessarily sure of what you're doing, but you're hopefully more sure than the day before, right? So it's sort of a continuous process of removing risk and learning more about what you're doing. One of the things I think the most underrated part about student entrepreneurship is the risk that you can take, right? So while I was getting a degree and being a student athlete, I basically got to play around with this idea, and I had the flexibility of knowing that if it didn't work, I could still go to the dining hall and eat. I still had a roof over my head. So that sort of puts off the choice a little bit of, you know, when are you actually going to commit to this as your day job? I don't want to say the moment I started taking this seriously, because I want to think I took this seriously, but the moment that it really turned from a neat science project to a business was not the day that we made the company, because anyone can go file some paperwork and incorporate a company, but it was the first time that we took real money. So we won a business plan competition that was like something like $50K from the Department of Energy in a prize, and $50K in an investment from a nonprofit impact fund, right? So all of a sudden, as a junior in college, I had $50K from the U.S. taxpayer and $50K from an investment, and both of those people wanted to, see sizable return and impact on their. Once we had other people's money, right? Other people that were trusting the vision that we were putting forth. That's what made it, really serious for me, that this was, this was gonna be my day job with my career, and not just a neat science project. On a tech, and that sort of goes hand in hand with a technical progress, right? Because the more technical progress you make on an idea, the more traction it gets, and at a certain point, you sort of reprioritize your life around what you're doing. So I don't know if there's a definite point in where you say, okay, this is an idea that I want to take into a startup, or this is an idea that, or this startup is something that I'm going to focus full time on. At least to me, it was a question of resources. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you very much. I mean, you never are really sure. Like you said, there's no one size fits all, but it's a good way to have insight. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you definitely never are sure, but one thing that helped us get on that path also was talking to a lot of people, right? So taking not just your input on this, but people like Bob's, IPVC, Launch House's input. Once we had heard from enough people, we had heard a lot of no's, but once we heard from enough people that this was probably something that was worth pursuing, that sort of gave us the confidence that this was, something we should be focusing on heavily. And then, the funding followed, and then we were really committed to it.
All right. Thank you very much.
Sure. Good luck and welcome to Case.
Thanks. I'm really excited.
That was a great question. Tiffany, you're up next.
Okay, Felipe. So I guess to follow on to that question and your response, I think back to when we were office mates sitting next to one another. You were burning the midnight oil. You were there early and stayed late. How did you know, you just said you have 9 people in your team, which is, congratulations, that is really remarkable. How did you know when it was time to add each of those people? I am sure that growth is as scary as potential failure in some ways, from understanding that's an investment in a person. Now you're paying their bills. Can you talk a little bit about, how did you know when it was time to add people? How when it was, how many to add, and how did you go from yourself in that office to 9 people in a relatively short time?
Yeah, I'll say that. I don't know if I have figured that process out, but that has been a really scary part of this, because it's again another chicken and an egg thing, right? Because you bring in projects, right? Whether they're funded by industry, funded by venture capital, funded by the government, and we have a mix of all of those. And you need people to support the project. So you hire someone to support that project, but that project at some point is going to end, and that person's salary won't. So you basically always need to continuously find a way to bring in new funds to support your team, right? And that's only half of the battle, because you also need to make sure you choose the right person, right? So we've been hiring pretty intensely. Obviously, things have slowed down recently, right? But we've been hiring pretty intensively since last summer. And hiring is very difficult, right? It takes a lot of time, right? So that's a big cost. You invest a lot in searching for the right person, flying them out to interview them, relocating them. So you don't want to get that wrong. And then you also invest a lot of time onboarding someone. So every hiring decision needs to be really methodical. So for us, one of the things that helps is that it's a small community of people who have the necessary expertise here. So we've basically made a mix of very qualified scientists, several of them older than me, who work for us, and younger co-ops and interns, sort of on a rotational basis. For me, everything is sort of driven by, at least this is my personal rule, but making sure we had enough receivable funds to support that person for at least a year, and making it clear how long we had funding available for them. I tell everyone who we hire that funds are, this is how much runway we have. If I'm getting paid at the end of that, you're getting paid, right? And I think it's honest communication about the risk that they are joining a startup and not a large company, and and that funds aren't guaranteed after a certain date. But once you do take the leap and decide you have enough funds to support someone, then you also have to work really hard to utilize the talent that you're bringing on to make sure that you can keep bringing funds into your business. So I would say I would only bring someone on if I'm absolutely sure that we have a really convincing path to keep finding support for them, and that they're going to help grow the business.
You're busy. You got a lot going on.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
No, thank you. It's been quite a ride. I spend a lot less of my time as a scientist and a lot more of my time, managing now sort of 9 people.
Wow.
There's things that you definitely don't expect that take a lot of time and resources, and do, right? So.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure.
The next question is coming from Jim.
Hey, Felipe. So as I plan my next 4 years coming at Case, I'm also very interested in kind of like an entrepreneurship path as a student, but I was just kind of wondering, could you please share your story and any advice on how you balance like maximizing technical education with engineering, while also making sure you don't shoot yourself in the foot later down the line and have the necessary business skills to perform like as an entrepreneur?
Yeah. So I guess let me take your first question. So you're an incoming freshman, right?
I will be, yes.
You will be, okay. Yeah. So let me step back one bit, and I don't know how I balanced what I was doing at Case. If I'm honest, I think a typical day I would probably wake up at like 5:20, go swim for 2 hours, go to class, go to the lab or the office, go swim again, and then go do homework and go to sleep at like 11 and eat somewhere in between that time. So you'll be amazed at like how much you can accomplish with your time. I never felt a conflict between learning business skills and learning engineering skills. I was a double major, so my schedule was pretty fixed. So I didn't really have many classes outside of the School of Engineering, but and I think I could have benefited from some more business education. But the way I saw it, at least, I've had to pick up a lot as I go, right? And you'll learn a lot by talking to mentors and going to conferences and seminars and things like that. The way I saw it, at least, is entrepreneurship is sort of a continuation of engineering, right? So it's like, as engineers, we apply science to solve problems. Applying science to develop a technology in the lab is only half of the battle, because that technology is useless if it doesn't get into the right hands, right? So the other part, the translation, is for me also an engineering challenge, right? On one end, you're working within systems of physical principles to develop new technologies. On the other end, you're developing technologies within market principles to develop something that you can sell, right? So there's definitely things that I had to study, very late nights on after college, right? Of like venture funding math and, what does this term sheet mean and things like that. So I think if you have room in your schedule and you want to take some classes in the business school, right? You've got 2 great professors here. I would avail yourself of that opportunity, but I would also make sure you have a really good technical background about something that you're passionate about, right? So for me, I've always been a scientist first. So I would make sure you don't overextend yourself, because there's a lot of things that you can do at Case, but there's not a lot of things you can do well at Case at the same time. So I would make sure you focus on a few things that you're really passionate about and do them well.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Sure.
That's a great question, and that's a really great response, Felipe. Bob, you're up next.
Sure. Well, Felipe, I'm going to share a couple things. One thing is, starting small is super important. And I remember Felipe was, questioning, I need $250 to do a prototype, and you had touched on it before, and it was so great that ThinkBox has that resource. So other folks on this line, again, starting with that small kernel of funding, and it's a lot of money for a student.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and again, he had this idea in high school, and it's great. And also, one of the things of believing in yourself, Felipe, I remember at Magnet, the guy from NASA started to argue with you.
Yeah.
I remember this distinctly.
I could have been more diplomatic in retrospect.
You were super diplomatic. He was rude. So here's literally a rocket scientist arguing with Felipe, and other people in the room are saying, what the hell are they talking about? And Felipe's very lightly back to him saying, well, sir, on the tarmac, this happens, and this is where we can get efficiencies. And this guy's like, you don't know what you're talking about. Well, one thing is, Felipe didn't know what he should think already, and he came at it from an angle that wasn't beaten out of him, which was great. And then months later, this same guy is defending what you thought as feasible.
President Obama might have helped out a little bit in the middle, but yes.
Yes, exactly. So, that's just, again, sometimes unconventional thinking is super important. A lot of times it is.
Absolutely.
And tell us, okay, you couldn't go into NASA because...
So at least for the first half of my career at Case, I wasn't a U.S. citizen yet. So I'm originally from Mexico, and I had a green card, but I wasn't a U.S. citizen yet. So that came through later in my sophomore year. I was finally able to get into NASA. So get into NASA right there.
You think you have barriers to being a successful company? First, you had to become a U.S. citizen. to move to the next level of testing. I love the story. You know, I've shared it a number of times of what Felipe has accomplished. And then I'll say one more thing. And if you could just share a little bit about your White House journey. And also, let me just put a thing that Felipe was very, very busy because he was also a swimmer. And I encouraged him to join this thing to do a White House. And I kept emailing him, you've got to enter this. And he emails me back at 12:02 in the morning with a thread saying, I got in on time at 11:58. It was due 11:59. But why don't you kind of share then what happened and all the doors that opened from you for there, and then I'll mute myself.
Sure. Thanks, Bob, for bringing that up. So two things there. One, yes, there's like you'll face a lot of resistance here if you're doing something. Not here, right? In general, right? You're going to face a lot of resistance if you're doing something new, and that comes often from really well-intentioned people who are just trying to prevent you from wasting your time. For me, it was always about being really confident in the physical principles of what you're backing what you were doing. So why it's important to be a good scientist or a good engineer, and that can give you the confidence to face adversity, right, or disbelief. I even had one professor who won't be named who said he thought I was thinking beyond the possible if I wanted to advance this technology, right? And I think that disbelief is sort of normal for anytime you're trying to do something new, right? So to Bob's point, one of the first times we got some real traction was after a clean energy business plan competition that we won from the Department of Energy. We ended up through various paths. One of them was the application that I got in at the very last minute, being selected to go to the White House and present with 3 of the sharks from Shark Tank. So I'm occasionally on Shark Tank. That clip airs. And then we all, the 4 of us entrepreneurs who were there got to meet President Obama. And that was, I had become a citizen maybe a year before then. So that was an incredible honor, right? And he talked to us a bit behind the scenes and was telling us about, why, how entrepreneurship, the idea of coming up with a new idea and making something new is really the essence of the American dream. So if I wasn't motivated before, I was definitely motivated after that experience, right? And I've definitely taken that to everything we do. So there's been some incredible moments of being an entrepreneur, such as that one, right? I'm definitely never going to forget shaking the president's hand. But it's not all fun like that. There's some very tough times as well, and some really awkward moments. So a few months after that, right, once I thought I had gotten the hang of meeting big government officials and presenting at fancy places, I was invited to a presentation at the White House, at the Pentagon, for some Air Force leadership. The only issue was that I thought it was a meeting and everyone else knew it was a presentation. So I actually showed up without slides to a huge presentation at the Pentagon. So that was really awkward. There are highs and lows to entrepreneurship. You just have to be really confident in what you're doing.
I'll add one more thing. Again, Felipe, you're just a humble and kind person. Yeah, I remember when you told me, I'm starting to win awards because I've won awards.
Yeah, exactly.
And I got to get back in the lab. So you were just so mature that it's like, you said, I got to prove this out. I've got to do the hard work. I got to roll up my sleeves. So
and I still feel like that, right? So we kind of disappeared from the public eye, right, for a few years when we were at Argonne National Lab, sort of working on proving out the science a little bit more and being really sure of what we were saying. And thankfully, everything that we had seen initially at CASE and at NASA continued to scale well. But I think it is important, it's good to communicate your science, right, and to effectively show people the value that you can generate. But you can't let the communications angle lead the technical progress, right? It's a delicate balance, right? But it's an important one to have secure, I guess. But I do remember that conversation, Bob. That was a good one.
Felipe, can you tell us a bit more about the NASA scientists that first disagreed with you and then ended up agreeing with you, and how that unfurled?
Yeah, I won't necessarily address that specifically, but in general, that happens all the time. And that's really because if you're doing something new, the burden of proof is on you, right, to prove that what you're doing works. And I think, as much as people have pushed back, in general, scientists do, as confrontational as they could be, scientists do always have an open mind and can always be convinced by data. Right, so it's all about not letting things like that get to you, but then also doing good science to prove out what you're saying. I've always thought that if something ends up relying on my personal credibility, right? If our value proposition relies on my personal credibility, then I've done something wrong. For me, it's always been about not necessarily being confrontational or not arguing, but just accepting what people say when we have data to back it up, bringing up that data. And when we don't, then we know what we need to go do in the lab.
Absolutely. And obviously, the White House is a huge highlight of your time with the company, but what's another really big highlight of your time at the company that you always kind of look back on to re-encourage yourself when things might go wrong?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've the White House was a really incredible experience, right? So was running experiments with NASA. That was just incredible feeling. Every time we run a successful test, right, so not all of them we could talk about exactly what we're doing, but every time we run a successful experiment that no one has done before, whether it's a demo or something that we have some reasonable confidence that it's going to work, or whether it's something that's totally new, that's always a really cool feeling to know that you had an idea, you built a team around it, you got funding to support it, and then you were able to do something that no one else had done. A few months ago, we signed our first deal to license part of our technology for a really niche application. So that was sort of the first time that we did we really quote unquote commercialized something successfully, right? So it's still in the very early stage. It's a very small application, but that was sort of the validation of everything we had been working on for the past 7 years. That it made sense to do this as a startup and not go work at a big company, for example.
What's one time where you either went down a path you weren't expecting, or you kind of had to compromise on something when working with your team, and then it ended up both being beneficial, and then another time where you kind of were like, okay, we could have done that differently?
So things never work out the way I expected. One of the things I thought as being the head of a startup, right, or being a CEO, I always thought that I would do whatever I wanted, right? That I was the boss, and at the end of the day, I ruled by fiat, and whatever I said goes, and that's not true, right? I don't really pick, for example, when I need to come in. Because I come in earlier than everyone else, and I don't pick when I leave because I leave later than everyone else. I may not have someone who I report to directly, but I report to all of our investors and all of our program managers. And by the same token, we hire a lot of smart people, not so that we can tell them what to do, like Steve Jobs said, but so that they can tell us what to do, right? So now that there's 9 of us, I'm not the expert in everything. And there's definitely times where I defer to my team, right, or to other people that we work with on what the right path forward is. Sometimes, and usually that works well. Other times where that hasn't worked well is where I realized that my role is not necessarily as the chief scientist here, but sort of as the connector, right? So I have all the streams of information, and I have to either fuse or disseminate them appropriately so that either people have the information that they need to make the decision, right? That I delegate the authority and the information flow to the right person, or that I can catch things before they get out. So structuring those processes and figuring out what decisions I need to be part of and what can be done without me in the loop is still, I think, where I'm growing as a manager and as a leader, right? There's been many mistakes there that have been made along the way. None of them have killed a company yet. Thankfully, we're still here. But it's definitely all a learning experience.
That's a really great answer. And just one last question to kind of wrap this up. What's the biggest piece of advice you would tell yourself when you started this company to help encourage you through the process?
I would say to work hard, and I mean, it sounds trite, right? But I would say to work hard and never give up. You need to be really sure. If you're going to start something new like this, it's going to be harder than you could ever imagine. But it's also going to be really rewarding. And you just want to make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. And once you commit to it, that you do it with everything you have, right? So multi-part answer, right? But the first thing, right, do this for the right reasons. So what are the wrong reasons to be an entrepreneur? To be your own boss, I think that's probably not the right reason, right? There's ways that you can have more freedom and more independence. To make a lot of money, I'd say that's actually probably not necessarily, I mean, I definitely hope we do, right? I hope we have a very successful exit, but there's definitely way better ways to make a lot of money, fresh out of college. You can go be an investment banker, right? You can go be a lawyer. You can go into consulting. I think for the immediate return on your investment, being an entrepreneur, at least initially, is not necessarily the way to go and has a lot more risk. Second part of that, once you've convinced yourself and you've done this for the right reasons, is that you're gonna have to work extremely hard, like I was saying before. And then the last thing, which is a little bit paradoxical, but no matter how passionate you are about what you're doing for your career, and no matter how hard you're working, I've definitely learned that should be far from the most important thing in your life, right? So I've definitely always tried to keep that in perspective, because on the one hand, that helps you, right? Because if you tie all of your value and all of your fulfillment and your self-worth to your startup, that's a really toxic environment. And on the other hand, there's things like your family are so much more important than what you do in your career, right? So you should always keep that in perspective.
That's a wonderful answer.
Glad I could help.
Great. All right. Well, I will jump back in. Marianne, thank you so much for moderating. It's one of the best parts about our speaker series is seeing students like you step in and moderate and acquire a new skill set. So you did a great job. Thank you for volunteering to do this. And Felipe, it is great to see you, albeit sadly via Zoom instead of in person, kind of walking the halls of campus. And we do look forward to hopefully not too in the distant future to having you back on campus and engaging with our students. And we really appreciate your time today and everything you do for CASE students. Anytime there's a entrepreneur wants advice or students that are looking for guidance, like I know how willing you are to chat with people. So thanks for everything you do for your school.
No, it's my pleasure. I was really glad to talk to all of you. I hope to be back as soon as possible. All of you can find me. I still check my CASE email every day, so all of you can find me there if you ever want to drop me a note or need advice on anything.
Great. Well, good. Well, let me do a quick promo we have 3 events next. We sort of get ready to get back in the fall semester. We're gearing up our programming. We have 3 different speakers next week on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. On Wednesday of next week, Chris Young, who is the former CEO of McAfee and is a current board member at American Express and Snapchat, and a native of Cleveland Heights, is going to join us for a conversation on cybersecurity, but also sort of looking at diversity on boards. Chris is a really interesting, thoughtful guy. Was a college classmate of mine. On Thursday, an alum, Alex Durbis, who's hedge fund manager, doing some really interesting work in the public equity space. He'll join us for a conversation. Alex and I sat on a panel recently, and he is a live wire, and I think you'd enjoy that. So that'll be Thursday at 1 o'clock. And then on Friday, we're joined by another alum, Victoria Lipchitz, who's going to talk about big data and e-commerce. So that'll be on Friday at 1 o'clock. So we've got 3 programs next week for those of you that are available to join us. So again, Marianne and Felipe, thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing everybody soon.